The snow fell in restless eddies through the rafters of Castle Black, coating every stone and timber with a pale, unspoken chill. Samwell Tarley sat hunched over the oaken table in the maester's study, quill in hand, mind racing faster than his pen could keep up. Outside, the wind howled like a beast denied its prey. Inside, the fire in the hearth crackled, though it could hardly warm the dread that had settled into his bones. He had seen what lay south of the wall, and the memories haunted him still. The azure glow of the dead, the hollow gaze of those turned to ice and malice. But tonight, he believed he might have found a way to stem that tide. A stack of ancient tomes and scrolls lay half-piled on the floor beside him, interleaved with fragments of charcoal sketches, runes and sigils, lines marked with crimson ink where Sam had noted the properties of herbs, the phases of the moon, and the burning pitch light of dragonglass. It was in these margins, between the scratching of his pen and the hammering of his heart against his ribs, that the first true promise of hope had revealed itself. A reference, buried in a book older than the realm itself, to a bloom called the Whitefire Lily, rumored to grow only where the ice met the earth's molten breath. Maester Aemon had whispered of it once, in his old Targaryen accent, as a bedtime tale. Myths, the old man had said, woven by men desperate to keep death at bay. Yet here it was, in the faded parchment of The Blackwood's Guide to Northern Flora. A footnote so small it could be mistaken for a smudge. A single line. Where dragon's breath kisses the glacier's bone, there the Whitefire Lily springs, its sap a flame that burns coal. Sam had read it 3 times before daring to breathe. Cold flame, he had murmured to himself, half in awe and half in terror. What if its sap could undo the rot within the White Walkers? What if, instead of fighting death, one could reverse it? He shut the book with trembling fingers, the sound echoing like a prophecy in the vaulted chamber. He rose and walked to the window, wiping a hand across the glass. The wall loomed in the darkness beyond, a hulking ridge of ice, impossibly tall, that both protected and imprisoned the night's watch. And beyond it lay horrors he was still unprepared to name. Sam's breath fogged the pain, then cleared, and he drew a deep breath, steeling himself. There was no turning back. If this legend was true, if the Whitefire Lily could indeed cure the most fearsome contagion Westeros had ever known, then he, Samwell Tarley, coward and scholar, dismissed by some as bookish and weak, would be the one to find it. 3 days later, with a hastily packed satchel slung over his shoulder, Sam crept through the whispering wood along the eastern slopes of the Frostfangs. Gilly had begged him to stay, reminding him of the baby's frailty and the dangers that stalked the mountains. But Sam shook his head, voice firm for once. If there is no cure, then we all die, Gilly. Even Craster's sons. Her eyes had filled with tears, but she let him go. A woman who had already lost too much not to understand the price of hope. The cold bit through Sam's leathers as the path rose into the heights. The trees here were black and gnarled, their trunks sheathed in ice. He followed the course of a frozen stream, its waters locked in glassy stasis, listening for the faintest whisper of life beneath the crust. The maester's notes spoke of warm springs hidden within glacial fissures, pools of heated water that refused the winter's grasp. It would be there, at the threshold of fire and ice, that the lily would bloom. On the second night, he pitched his tent at the lip of a steaming vent, where the air shimmered with heat and the snow melted into hissing rivulets. He sat by the entrance, logbook open, plotting the lay of the land. It was then he heard it, a soft, phosphorescent glow that painted the breath of steam in pale blues and greens. He fumbled for a torch and ventured closer, heart pounding, only to find, nestled in a crevice warmed by an unseen furnace, a single delicate blossom. Its petals were the color of freshly fallen snow, but each one glowed faintly, as though lit from within by starlight. He knelt, hands trembling, and pulled a small vial from his satchel. With a blade so fine it felt like a whisper in his grasp, he nicked the stem and caught a drop of sticky sap. The substance burned like ice against his skin, leaving a cool fire that sang along his veins. He wrapped the stem, a withered remnant now, in cloth and stood, knapsack heavier with precious cargo. Returning to Castle Black was a trial by itself. Snowstorms rose and fell without warning, but Sam pressed forward, guided by a vision of hope. When at last he stumbled through the gate, breath ragged and fingers stiff, Maester Aemon was there to greet him. The old man's blind eyes widened at the sight of the lily's petals. "You found it," Aemon whispered, voice thick as milk. Old tales spoken in dread and wonder. "You have found it." Sam offered the vial. "If we can synthesize it, if we can test it, maybe the Night King's power can be undone." Aemon took the vial with a trembling hand and led Sam to the Maester's laboratory. Chains rattled as jars of powdered bones and glass tubes clinked against each other. The learned man set to work, eyes distant in ancient recollection. Sam watched as he measured the sap, adding distilled water, stirring in crushed dragon glass, and whispering words of instruction as though addressing a child learning to walk. Outside the gates of Castle Black stood silent sentinel against a world gone mad. Inside, 2 scholars, one old, one burdened by fear, hoped to alter the fate of all mankind. By dawn, Aemon had prepared a rudimentary serum. Sam held the vial up to the light, clear, still faintly luminous, as though it contained the last spark of a dying star. His heart thundered. They needed a test subject, and Samwell knew only one. Gren, his friend and brother of the watch, who lay fevered and shaking in the infirmary, his black blood corroded by a wound from an undead wight. Gren had saved Sam's life once. Sam would save his. He crept to the infirmary, where the candles flickered against pale walls. Gren's breath came in ragged wheezes. His skin was cold as death, lips tinged blue. Sam slid a stool beside him, knelt, and gently pried the vial from Aemon's cloak. The old man watched from the doorway, silent vigil. Gren's eyes opened, glassy with pain. "Sam," he croaked. Sam swallowed, voice tight. "Gren, it's going to be all right. I've got something that can help." Gren's gaze flickered over the vial. "Will it hurt?" Sam met his friend's stare. "I don't know. But if it works, it'll burn the cold out of you." He drew up a breath and plunged the needle into Gren's arm. The serum slid in, cool and bright. Gren's muscles twitched, his face contorted. Sam closed his eyes against the sound, a low, rasping cry of agony that filled the chamber. He kept the needle steady until the vial was emptied, and then withdrew it. Heart in his throat. For a moment, nothing but the candles sputter. Then Gren shuddered, his breath stilled, and his body lay perfectly still. A hush fell between Sam and Aemon, and then Gren's chest rose in a deep, unlabored breath. Sam knelt forward, pressing a hand to Gren's cheek. The skin was warm. Color crept into his lips. "It's working," Sam whispered, tears flooding his eyes. Below them, Gren's dark hair fluttered on the pillow as he sighed. "By the gods, it's working." Outside, the first light of winter dawn broke over the wall. Within the cold fortress, hope glimmered at last. A fragile, burning shard of flame that might, in time, banish the long night. Samwell Tarly closed his eyes, memories of White Walkers and fear and frost falling away. For the first time, he dared to dream of spring. K.N.D. Sam lay awake long after the others had drifted off. The lamplight in the Maester's tower guttered, casting his sleeping form in wavering shadows. Sam's thoughts spun like the swirling snow beyond the window. Gren's recovery seemed miraculous, yet the cure's success raised as many questions as it answered. How many White Walkers could be healed? Would the sap of the Whitefire Lily even touch those lich-bound horrors beyond the wall? Could the Night King himself be undone? Each question demanded answers Sam did not yet have. He crept from the tower at dawn and made his way across the chilly courtyard to Aemon's quarters. The old Maester sat by the fire, unrolled scrolls upon the table. His hands trembled as he dipped his quill in ink, copying notes into a leather-bound journal. "Good morning, Sam," Aemon greeted him without looking up. "I trust you rested?" "Not much," Sam admitted. He warmed his hands over the embers. "I have questions." Aemon smiled, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening. "That is the burden of knowledge. Tell me what troubles you. Sam hesitated. After Gren, What if the sap only works on those recently infected? Gren was wounded and turned. What of the undead born of old magic? What of the children's spells, or the power the Night King wielded himself? Will the cure suffice? Aemon set aside his quill. We both hoped it might be universal. But I suspect the White Fire's flame is bound to the natural order of living things corrupted by unnatural means. The walkers, fallen humans transformed, once alive, could be brought back. The Night King, forged in magic older than Valyria, might resist. Yet we cannot know until we test. Sam frowned. We need more sap, and more test subjects. We need to travel beyond the wall. Aemon's glance was heavy. A journey north is perilous. But you are right. If the realm is to stand a chance, you must seek the bloom where few dare to tread. I will remain here, refining the serum. You go, Samwell Tarly, to face the long night. He saw Sam's jaw tighten. He remembered the fear in Gren's eyes when he had administered the first dose, and the hope that glimmered afterward. He would go, for Gilly and her child, for his brothers of the Watch, for all mankind. 2 days later, Sam stood before the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, Brynden Rivers, known as Bloodraven, whose one good eye gleamed in the torchlight. Bloodraven listened as Sam laid out the Maester's findings and the need to venture far north of the wall in search of more Whitefire lilies. It is a fool's errand, Bloodraven said, voice low and gravelly. You asked to cross the haunted forest, to journey into lands where even wargs fear to tread. Sam squared his shoulders. Better a fool's errand than a dead realm. Bloodraven studied him. The depths of that living eye unreadable. I will grant you a small party. But know this. The true enemy is coming. The long night gathers, he said. Do not squander time. Sam bowed. Thank you, my lord. By midday, Sam had recruited 2 brave souls, Pip, stubborn and quick, and Edison Tollett, dolorous Ed, whose grim humor masked fear tempered by loyalty. Armed with dragonglass weapons and a reserve of the serum Aemon had prepared, the trio crossed the wall on a gorge carved by ancient frost, stepping into the white wilderness. The haunted forest was a silent cathedral of trees weighed down by ice. The wind whispered through the branches like mournful ghosts. Sam's heart tightened with every crack of frost. He clutched a cane of dragonglass, the final measure of protection should they fall upon wights or more terrible horrors. They traveled for 3 days, mapping the ridges and tracing the dry beds of streams that flowed only in warmer seasons. By the 4th night, they camped by a steaming hot spring, a ribbon of warm mist curling around them. Ed peered at Sam. You certain this is where the lilies grow? Sam nodded, recalling Aemon's map and the Maester's description. Where fire meets ice. They waited until dawn when the steam lifted, revealing at the edge of the pool a cluster of slender stems crowned with glowing blossoms. Sam's breath caught. The Whitefire lilies. He approached on trembling legs, drew his dagger, and carefully severed 3 stems, collecting the sap that dripped like frozen light into a hollowed horn. As he worked, a crack echoed from the forest depths. Pip and Ed froze. Sam looked up. Through the mist, the shape of a dead stag, its antlers formless in ice, advanced, its eyes faintly blue. White, risen once more, a twisted echo of life. Sam's pulse hammered. He pointed at the stag. Serum, ready. Pip dipped a woolen cloth into the sap, smeared it on the tip of his dagger. He lunged, stabbing the creature. The blade bit deep. The white recoiled, flesh sizzling with the cold fire of the Whitefire sap. Its form wavered, ice cracking, light imbued in its hollow eyes. It staggered, then collapsed into a mound of rime, its form dissolving as though thawed by flame. They watched as each wight that dared come near them was felled by the drugged dragonglass. A powerful illustration. Even newly turned horrors could be undone by Whitefire. Night fell, and they returned to Castle Black with their harvest. Aemon greeted them, eyes alight with excitement. He worked through the next week, synthesizing larger batches of serum, testing on more subjects. First fallen brothers who had succumbed recently, then whites captured in the yard. Each time, the serum worked. Limbs stiff from the cold regained warmth. Eyes clouded with death cleared to living brown. Voices returned in hoarse whispers. By the end of the week, 5 of the watch, once buried beyond the wall, stood blinking in confusion and wonder. Sam realized that if they could mass-produce the serum and deliver it swiftly, they might halt the true tide of death. But supply was limited. The lilies grew only in isolated fissures. More blooms had to be found, and soon. Maester Aemon called a council. Sam presented the results. 5 resurrected men, evidence of the serum's efficacy, and the threat that the flow of whitefire was too slow. The Lord command. No, Sam reminded himself. He was no longer just Samwell Tarly. Here he stood as a man bearing hope. He turned to the silent faces gathered in the war room. Eddard Snow of Winterfell, Lord Glover of Deepwood Motte, Lady Mormont of Bear Island, and representatives from the north. They listened, rapt, as Sam described his journey, the lilies, the sap, the resurrection of the fallen. I asked for ships, Sam said, voice clear despite the knots in his stomach. Caravans to transport sap and weapons coated with it. 1,000 serums, 1,000 saved lives. We must breach the long night and redeem those we lost. Eddard Snow leaned forward. Your words carry weight. Samwell Tarly. The North has no love for the Watch. Until now. Lady Mormont tapped her fingertips. If these lilies can save my men, I'll send every ship I have. Lord Glover nodded. We carve roads through frost for you, Maester. The sisters are at your disposal. Sam dared to smile. Then let us bring spring to the long night. Within days, supply caravans, guarded by watch and northern levies, crossed the wall. Sam himself rode with the first load of serum. Heart pounding with purpose he had never known. The wind bit, but he felt only the warmth of hope flowing through him. At Craster's Keep, where the keepers of the old ones gathered, they found dozens of whites, turned men who had once known fire and hearth. Sam administered the serum personally, each drop a promise. One by one the whites stirred, confusion in their eyes, then recognition. They wept in gratitude, pressing their hands to Sam's. But whispers of panic reached Sam. The Night King marched south, his host of the dead pressing on beyond the wall. Sam realized that time was the cruelest enemy, that every moment mortal hearts wavered, the dead advanced. He wrote a final note for Aemon. Send every ounce you can. We will meet at the Shadow Tower. He led the resurrected men south toward the wall, their number growing by dozens each day. The white fire lilies bloomed where fire met ice, and hope met despair in the wintry wastes. At the Shadow Tower, Sam prepared for the final gambit, to bring the serum to the foot of the wall, to coat the gates and arrow slits, to transform the living dead into living life. Ed and Pip stood by his side, faces drawn but proud. As dawn broke, the horn of the watch pealed. On the horizon the silent column marched. Ice-clad warriors, skeletal cavalry, the Night King mounted on his frost wyrm. Sam felt the weight of destiny settle upon him. He turned to the men he had saved. Today, we fight not for vengeance, but for redemption. We carry the fire of life into the heart of the long night. Steel rang against steel as the first horn sounded. The battle for the living and the dead had begun. Sam charged forward, dragonglass sword in hand, heart ablaze with the cold fire of the whitefire lily, determined to reclaim the world for the warmth of spring. And so the long night gave way, not to darkness, but to dawn. Oh. Sam's heartbeat thundered in his ears, as the first wail of the horn split the dawn chill. The frozen plain before the Shadow Tower lay like a shattered mirror, each blade of grass a shard of ice reflecting the pale light. Beyond the wall, the dead massed, an unending tide of blue-tinged bodies and skeletal steeds, their numbers stretching into the horizon. Sam held his sword, its dragonglass blade coated in whitefire's sap, the faint luminescence pulsing like a heartbeat in the cold. Around him stood the resurrected, 5, 10, 20 men who had been whites only days ago, now returned to flesh and bone, clothed in armor scavenged from crash sites and abandoned outposts. Their faces were tired, haunted by memories of what they had become, but resolute. Behind them, the black granite towers of the Shadow Tower rose stark against the sky. Its gates were barred, its walls manned by the Night's Watch in dwindling numbers. Once, Sam had believed the wall impregnable. Now he feared each breath of wind was a harbinger of its collapse. He glanced at Dolorous Ed, whose humor had not deserted him even in the face of oblivion. Ed gave him a crooked grin. "Never thought I'd be on the wrong side of the wall with resurrected men, but here we are," Ed said, voice gruff. He tapped the pommel of his sword. "Let's show them life still has its comforts." Pip, eyes bright, checked his spear, its point glinting with frozen tincture. "And when life fails, we remind them the dead go better with whitefire." Sam managed a short laugh, but his throat was tight. He looked at the ranks. His brothers of the Watch, his friends, wounded men now healed. Among them stood Gren, his scars barely healed, stronger in resolve than ever. Gren caught Sam's eye and nodded. The two shared a silent promise: to fight for the living, and to end the long night. With a roar, the resurrected surged forward, breaking from the ranks of the Watch. Sam charged as well. Sword raised. Ice and earth flew beneath their feet. The first clash came at the edge of the courtyard, where a band of whites, once Craster's keepers, advanced with slavering ferocity. Sam raised his blade and cut through the first, whitefire sap burning cold through ice-shrouded flesh. The white collapsed, the sap eating the magic that bound it, its body cracking like frozen wood, then disintegrating into a pile of frost and dust. Around him, the resurrected drove their swords through more dead, turning carnage into cleansing flame. Smoke from the burning whites hung low in the air. Beyond the courtyard stood the main battle line, where the Watchmen and northern levies had formed a shaky shield wall. Sam saw Ed there, hacking at whites who pressed too close, their eyes glowing with hatred. He saw Pip, stabbing with practiced fury. He saw Gren, singularly focused on one huge white whose helm was molded from ice. Sam sprinted to his side, thrusting his blade into its flank. The creature staggered, then fell. "Thank you," Gren panted, breathing hard. "For everything," Sam nodded. "Focus on staying alive this time." The sound of steel on steel echoed as the dead pressed forward, a crashing wave threatening to overwhelm the living. Then came the trumpets, a clarion call from the tower. The gates swung open, and from within poured silhouettes, men and women clad in mail, bearing banners of the north. First came Lady Lyanna Mormont of Bear Island, axe raised high, her petrel of a voice ringing. "For the living," she cried. With her charge, others followed. A contingent from Deepwood Motte under Lord Glover's banner, riders from Winterfell led by Eddard Snow himself. They clashed into the flank of the whites, pinning them between two blades, the middle ground turning into a maelstrom of carnage and whitefire. Sam fought beside Gren, the sap still pulsing along his blade. He carved through the dead, each cut releasing a hiss of steam, each fallen foe a testament to Aemon's work. His mind was clear, free from doubt. Only the rhythm of battle and the thin sheen of life he wove with every swing. Hours passed in a blur of movement. The sun climbed higher, but its warmth did little to thaw the frozen ground. Still, the living fought on. Soldiers learned to coat their arrows in whitefire tincture, firing flaming shafts into the ranks, turning massed whites into collapsing columns of ice. Ziga engines at the tower were loaded with barrels of whitefire solution, their catapults sending globs of luminous substance soaring over the field. Each impact unleashed a tide of cleansing fire, shards of white evaporating in pale light. At midday, the tide began to turn. The dead faltered, their ranks thinning. Bits of wall, toppled in earlier raids, were reclaimed. Watchmen rallied behind Sam, bolstered by the sight of hope embodied in Whitefire's power. Even those who had lost loved ones fought fiercely, driven by the memory of the warmth they had known. Sam felt a fierce pride and indescribable sorrow. For every white felled, he saw in its place someone he might have been had men not succumbed to death. The war, he realized, was not simply between life and death, but between despair and hope. Then, as the battle reached its crescendo, the sky darkened. A chill wind blew across the plain, carrying with it the echo of grinding ice. Sam turned, dread coiling in his gut. There, beyond the shattered remnants of the fight line, moved a tall figure wearing a crown of ice, his cloak of death stirring like smoke. The Night King. He advanced alone on a frozen steed, eyes fixed on the wall. His presence stilled the living, a tremor of fear rippling through the ranks. The newly resurrected froze in their tracks, stale memories flickering behind their eyes. Sam felt his courage flicker, but he forced himself forward, stepping before Gren. "It's him," he whispered, drawing a deep breath. "Stay close." The Night King stopped a quarter-mile away, lifting one gloved hand. A blast of icy magic shot forth, slamming into the ranks and sending men sprawling. Around him, hundreds of whites rose from the ground, weakened only momentarily before surging anew. A wave of dread washed over Sam. If the Night King could raise the dead anew, would white fire work twice? Aemon had warned him the magic was bound to once living beings, not to the pure ice sorcery of the king himself. Sam swallowed, breath tightening. He glanced at Adid and Pip. "We have to stop him, or this all means nothing." Ed nodded, face grim. "Let's remind him who made this world first." They broke from cover, sprinting across ice-cracked ground. Rain of white fire arrows fell around them, but no volley could withstand the magic of the Night King. The frozen cavalry clattered at their flank, striking with ice-shod hoofs. Sam leapt over a broken pike, blade raised, and slew the first rider. His sword hissed with white fire. The white horse reared, then collapsed as its rider vanished. But the ice sorcery was too strong. White fire spat out in steam against the king's vast magic, each strike fizzling on contact. Sam realized that to end this, he had to reach the king himself. For a moment he froze. This was madness. Yet he felt the pull of destiny, to save the realm, to redeem the fallen, to end the curse. He bolted ahead, dodging a torrent of ice shards. The Night King watched him come, expressionless beneath the crown of frost. Sam closed the distance, chest heaving. He swung his blade, aiming for the king's chest. The blade struck with a dull thud against ice-forged breastplate, the impact echoing like rolling thunder. Sam staggered backward, the point of his blade embedded in the armor. "You cannot win." The king's voice whispered in Sam's mind, each syllable like cracking ice. "Life cannot conquer death." Sam shook his head. I believe in hope." He yanked his sword free, the white fire sap glowing brighter. Surrounded by the hum of magic, he thrust again, this time at the king's sword arm. The blade severed through gauntlet and bone, the king's weapon falling with a clang. The Night King recoiled, hand raised, and the air filled with a vortex of frost. Sam prepared for the magical strike. But at that moment, another figure burst into view. Maester Aemon, robes uncharacteristic, stained with soot, staff in hand, followed by Gilly and the babe swaddled in her arms. "How did you?" Sam began, stunned. Aemon raised his staff, a vial of pure white fire sap strapped at his belt. "No time. Infuse the sap into the child's cry. That pure innocence may seal the power." He produced the vial and smashed it on the ground. A searing flume of cold flame roared up, touching the babe and enveloping it in ghostly glow. The Night King paused, his crown's ice flickering. The babe's wail cut through the field, a clear note of untainted life ringing across the plain. The white fire merged with the first breath, and the magic soared upward, a column of living flame. The king's expression flickered, confusion stirring behind the crown. The magic of the white fire lily, born of life, bound to the purity of the newborn, clashed with the necromantic sorcery. Sam seized the moment. He charged and lunged, blade plunging through the king's chest. The crown cracked, and the king's eyes widened. A shockwave rippled outward, as the corpse king shattered into shards of ice that scattered like shattered dreams. The magic column collapsed, rain of white fire mist falling over the battlefield. With the king's destruction, the remaining whites convulsed and fell, their bodies dissolving in pale steam. Silence descended. The air was thick, with a scent of melting ice and charred earth. Sam sank to his knees, trying to catch his breath. All around, men and women stared in disbelief. The long night was over. Snowflakes drifted in golden sunlight now, each a testament to life's fragile triumph. Gren knelt beside Sam, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You did it," he said, voice raw. Sam looked up at the battered wall. The gates lay ajar, the ground strewn with broken ice and fallen foes. The shadow tower stood, scarred but unbowed. He thought of Gilly and the child, of Aemon's faith, of the thousands still to heal. But for this moment, the war was won. Later, in the courtyard, they raised a plank platform before the gate. Crowds of the Watch, the North, even freed wildlings gathered. Eddard Snow stepped forward as herald. "Let it be known across the realm," he called. "The wall has fallen, not by our foes, but by our courage. The long night is ended, thanks to Samwell Tarly, Maester and brother of the Watch, and the magic of the White Fire Lily. Death has been reborn as life once more." A cheer rose, echoing off stone and sky. Sam felt tears freeze on his cheeks, tasting salt of relief. He bowed his head, then looked up to see Gilly holding their child aloft. The babe's laughter rang clear, a melody of spring in the heart of winter. Over the weeks that followed, the serum of Whitefire, so named for its paradoxical warmth, was distributed across the north. Camps were set for displaced people. The resurrected helped rebuild, their presence a living reminder that death need not be the end. Even beyond the north, riders carried the serum to every holdfast, to River Run, to the Vale, to King's Landing itself. In the Red Keep, Queen Sansa Stark approved its use, believing in the promise of healing more than war. Sam remained at Castle Black, restoring the library and teaching the next generation of maesters and watchmen the art of Whitefire. Gilly opened a small infirmary, specializing in treating those who had suffered the frozen curse. Gren became warden of the West Watch, his laughter as bold as a summer's day. Eddard and Pip took to the road, carrying sap to remote villages, each stop a testament to life restored. Years later, tales were sung of the long night's end. Bards told of the cowardly maester who became a savior, of the Whitefire Lily blooming on ice and flame, of the babe whose cry shattered an ancient curse. Children of the North wore tokens of white petals around their necks. And every winter, at the feast of the New Year, the people drank to the health of Samwell Tarly, and to the hope that springs eternal in the coldest seasons. On the night of his death, many decades hence, Sam lay in his bed in the old maester's tower. Candles flickering, his bones weary with age, but his heart light. Gilly sat by his side, their child grown and bearing a daughter of her own. Sam turned his head and whispered, voice hushed but steady. "It was always hope," he said. "Remember that, my love. Fire may burn, ice may freeze, but hope can thaw the world." Gilly laid a hand on his, tears shining. "I will, always." Sam Tarly closed his eyes, a soft smile on his lips. Outside, a gentle snow began to fall, each flake a promise. In the courtyard below, the rebuilt shadow tower stood silent guard. And in the deep of the night, the first clear song of spring wound its way through the breeze. An everlasting testament to the power of life, and the courage of one man who dared to dream of a cure. Okay. Sam's passing marked the close of an era, and the opening of another. On the day the snow began to melt in earnest, Gilly stood on the parapet of the old maester's tower, wind tugging at her dark hair, and watched as her granddaughter, little Alice, chased a bird across the courtyard below. Alice was 5 now, old enough to walk without fear over the flat stones Sam had so meticulously swept each morning, old enough to remember her grandfather's stories of Whitefire and the thawing of the long night. Gilly drew her shawl tighter, breathing the scent of thawing earth and wood smoke, and thought of all that Sam had loved in life. The endless pursuit of knowledge, the fierce loyalty of friends, the hope that lay at the heart of every winter's end. Below, the resurrected, no longer called that, but returned, a people reborn, helped the novices of the Night's Watch clear the courtyard for spring planting. Rows of hardy greens and root vegetables now grew where once the dead had fallen. The same beds would supply the Watch's kitchens for decades to come. In the shadow of the wall, fields of white-fire lilies bloomed where dragon's flame had once met glacier, each pale petal glowing in dawn's light like a promise. Sam had established a small nursery there, and after his death, Amon's acolytes continued his work, crossbreeding the lilies with hardy northern strains to create saplings that thrived even in the bitterest winds. Elise had learned to tend the beds herself. Each morning she rose with the dawn and ventured from her mother's quarters, basket in hand, to gather dew-laden petals. Gilly often accompanied her, teaching the girl the names of the herbs Sam had used in his earliest experiments. Frostcap ferns, heartroot, burnt thistle. Gilly pointed out the sturdy bluebell that lured bees to the courtyard in summer, and explained how Sam had once tried to brew a tincture from its pollen. Elise listened eagerly, eyes bright, and always asked after her grandfather. Did Papa Sam really chase the Night King alone, Mummy? And Gilly would smile, and yes, he had. And yes, he had believed that hope alone could slay fate. Winter had receded so fully that the Raven's midnight flights no longer carried the taste of ice. The wall, still immense and silent, served now as a monument to sacrifice rather than a bulwark against annihilation. In its tunnels and watchtowers, Order of the Lily, a new order of healers and scholars, took root. Founded by Maester Amon's last apprentices, they studied every aspect of Whitefire, its growth, its magical resonance, its applications in healing not only the dead, but the living. By day, novices studied in candlelit halls. By night, they practiced their craft at bedside, coaxing frostbite victims back from the brink, soothing burns with sap-infused poultices, and most impressively, treating the lingering effects of magic-induced maladies in wildling children born under the aurora's glow. But as Gilly looked on, she felt a tremor beneath her heart. With hope so potent, there would be those who sought to harness it for power. Gilly remembered Sam's warning in his final days, that human ambition was as unquenchable as greed, and that any gift could become a weapon in the wrong hands. Already rumors swirled in the great houses to the south, whispers of Whitefire-laced poisons, of armies that might be resurrected to serve new kings, of wargs who would breed ice beasts to guard secrets lost to time. Gilly shook her head against the wind. She would not let Sam's legacy become a tool of tyranny. She took Eli's hand and led her away from the lily beds, down the spiral stairs of the tower, and into the archive Sam had left behind. The walls there were lined with scrolls and volumes, Sam's journals, Amon's notes, even the Blackwood's original guide to northern flora, now annotated in careful looping script. Gilly laid her palm on a leather-bound volume whose pages still bore the scent of pine resin and old snow. Your grandfather recorded everything, she told Alice, voice soft. Every experiment, every failure, every triumph. She drew the girl close. And he entrusted it to those who would use it only for the good of all. You will help him protect that trust. Ace gazed up at her mother, eyes wide. May? Gilly smiled. Yes, you. One day you'll be a keeper of these books, and of the lilies, and of Papa Sam's memory. Elise beamed. She already recited passages from Sam's lectures, about the harmony of fire and ice, about the paradox of the Whitefire lily, about the creed of the Watch. She practiced her first healings on frost-bitten seedlings, her small hands gently massaging sap onto torn leaves. In King's Landing, word of the order had reached Queen Sansa's ears. Sansa, who had once walked the battlements beneath the wall, had since forged a realm that valued knowledge as much as steel. She petitioned the Citadel to grant the order official status as a sister institution to the Maester's College. After debate and diplomacy, Long letters exchanged by Raven. Long nights of council. Citadel Towers agreed to send 2 archmasters to the wall, experts in botany and magical theory, to oversee training and ensure that Whitefire would not be perverted. When the archmasters arrived in the late spring, they brought fresh minds and fresh questions. Was Whitefire's sap truly magical, or merely an alchemical marvel? Could its properties change with new crossbreeding? Did the lilies owe their power to the hot springs where they grew, or to some deeper magic buried in the frostfangs? Novices lined the courtyard to greet them, each bearing samples of hybrid lilies in woven baskets. Gilly watched as Elise, now tall enough to carry her own pack, welcomed them with a curtsy and offered leaflets summarizing Sam's original protocols. The archmasters, Larry's the quiet and Turnin the bold, were impressed. Larry's traced the striations in a petal with his quill, murmuring about chromatic resonance. Turnin marveled at the lily's ability to thrive in near-freezing ground, comparing it to legends of the snow rose of Yeti. Together, they spent days in the nursery, days in the labs, days in the infirmary where Whitefire poultices healed the sick and limped alike. But Gilly noticed Larry's linger in the archive longer than necessary, his thin fingers caressing Sam's hand-drawn maps of northern fissures. That evening, Gilly confronted him in the hall outside the library. "Archmaester Laris," he said, voice firm. "Is there something you require?" He turned, eyes a pale gray in the torchlight. "Lady Gilly," he said, bowing slightly. "I find your archives most enlightening. But these notes on lily habitats, if replicated elsewhere, we could grow entire fields of Whitefire." Bender. Gilly's breath caught. "Whitefire is not for fields, Archmaester. It is precious. Limited, sacred. Papa Sam insisted it be used sparingly for healing the living, not for fueling armies." Laris' lips curved in a polite smile. "I understand your caution. Yet I wonder, if the kingdom faced a new catastrophe, would we not need reserves? Fields, greenhouses, perhaps southern gardens overwintered with heat? Surely you would not forbid all expansion of knowledge?" Gilly's jaw tightened. "I will not allow Whitefire to become a weapon of war." Larry's inclined his head. "Of course. Yet history has shown us that magic thrives when coupled with commerce. Should the crown wish to underwrite cultivation, to share the cure beyond the wall, to your granddaughter's future—" "Enough," Gilly interrupted. "Sam's legacy is not for profit or power. It is for life." Laris' eyes flickered. "You worry too little of hope's hazards, Lady Gilly." He strode off, cloak swirling. Gilly watched him go, heart pounding. She returned to the archive where Alice waited, brushing her hair. The girl looked up. "Mummy, will there be wars again?" Gilly knelt, gathering her into her arms. "Perhaps. But we will protect Papa Sam's legacy. We are guardians of hope." And so began the quiet resistance at the wall. Gilly and Alice, aided by Ed's acolytes, cataloging every lily, every scroll, every protocol, forming the keepers of Whitefire, an inner circle sworn to secrecy and stewardship. They met in hidden chambers beneath the shadow tower, where torches burned with wax made from hot spring bees. There, they debated cultivation limits, exchange agreements with the southern holds, and warnings to any who would hoard the lily's power. Meanwhile, in the North's fractured politics, not all looked kindly on the order. Lords of the Vale and Dorne whispered among themselves. Why should a remote fortress control the cure for death? Merchants in King's Landing clamored for licenses to import Whitefire sap, promising wealth beyond measure. Scholars in Old Town demanded access, citing the Citadel's charter. Even the Iron Bank of Bravos made inquiries, seeing profit in Whitefire's potential as a luxury apothecary's item. Gilly realized that open conflict lay at hand, not with swords, but with parchment, with law, with commerce. She wrote to Queen Sansa, pleading for charters of protection for the order, sealed by the royal seal and enforced by the crown's peacekeepers. Sansa replied with swift ink. The crown recognized the order's autonomy, declared any unauthorized sale or export of Whitefire punishable by treason, and dispatched knights to guard the wall's nurseries. Still, rumors persisted. Gilly learned that in Lice, a consortium had grown lilies in a heated greenhouse, but the sap proved unstable, blossoming toxic under southern suns. In Korth, another group had attempted crossbreeding with the blue lotus, producing blooms that sedated instead of healed. Throughout Essos, whitefire variants appeared, some lethal, some inert. Each failure served as a warning. The magic of Sam's lily was bound to its primal soil and to the harmony of ice and fire he had uncovered. Back at the wall, in the planting fields, Alice knelt among the blooms, carefully cutting a stem for analysis. Aemon's former cell now housed a chamber where Archmaester Turnin conducted trials. They filled vials with distilled sap, observing its luminescence, its viscosity, its reaction to salts and glacial water. A's apprenticed beside Turnin, learning to measure pH, to calculate dilutions, to chart crystals under magnification. Her bright mind thrilled at every discovery. How the sape's compounds inhibited necromantic energy. How its properties changed at the solstice. How the presence of wild honey amplified its warmth. Yet at every time Alice felt pride, she also felt the weight of responsibility. That misstep could unleash disaster. She thought of her grandfather's final words. "Hope can thaw the world, but only if we guard it." She resolved then to become the greatest keeper of whitefire, to honor both Sam's vision and Aemon's rigor, to ensure that life's fire would never again be snuffed out by the darkness of ambition. Years turned to decades. Ace grew into a woman both fierce and kind, her hair streaked with silver, but her eyes as resolute as Sam's had been on the battlefield. She walked the fields of lilies, lantern in hand, whispering names of those she had healed. Children of Craster's line, soldiers maimed by skirmishes with remnant whites, women bearing the scars of southern wars. She taught them each to plant a single petal in their own villages, to guard it with care, to pass on the tale of the long night and the young maester who had dared to heal it. By the time of her final winter, when her own granddaughter's child stirred in her arms, Alice had overseen the largest flowering of whitefire ever recorded. Entire gardens blooming along the wall's southern face, and isolated nurseries at Old Town, at High Garden, at the Summer Isles. Still, no variant thrived as fully as those in the primal ground where fire met ice. And every year, Alice returned there, planting seeds and weaving her own amendments into the soil. On her final return, she found herself standing beside Gilly's gravestone, which bore two names, Gilly Hornery, keeper of whitefire, and her daughter Alice, though Gilly had passed only a decade earlier. Alice knelt, pressing a lily to the stone, feeling the sap's warmth seep into her palms. She closed her eyes and spoke softly. "We have kept the promise, Mother. Hope endures." A breeze stirred the flowers around them, and in that moment, Alice felt Sam's presence. A lightness in the air, a whisper in the rustle of petals. Tears slid down her cheeks, warm on aged skin. She rose and turned toward the freezing dawn, where the wall gleamed like a promise in the morning light. Beyond it, the world waited, still scarred by war, still thirsting for renewal, still needing the fire of life. But now, thanks to Samwell Tarley and the generations who followed, the cure for the long night had become a testament not just to one man's bravery, but to the enduring power of hope, and to the steadfast guardianship of those who dared to believe. A.K.N.G. Alice lingered long after the sun had set, the lantern's glow flickering over rows of translucent petals and their guardian leaves. Though the fields of whitefire lily stretched as far as the eye could see, she felt the hush of unease in the air, an echo of the whispered rumors that had drifted south on trading ships and returned like a poisonous seed to the wall. Even in this bastion of healing, ambition and fear had begun to weave their dark tendrils. The warning first reached her in the form of a broken sigil, the hands in flame emblem of House Darren, scorched into a lantern, left among the blooms. House Darren, once minor lords of a frozen barony, had vanished from maps when their line died out centuries before. Yet now, men wearing their livery were said to roam the Vale and the Fingers, trading promises of immortality and everlasting power for the rarest whitefire sap. Some claimed the cult of the cold flame had even kidnapped small folk to harvest petals, leaving wilted stems and blood on the bedrock. At dawn, Alice convened the keepers of Whitefire in the hidden chamber beneath the shadow tower. Around the torchlit table sat Gerd the Returned, his scar still visible where once ice had gripped his flesh. Myra Ashfoot, the Order's steward and deft with both quill and blade, and Archmaester Turnan, whose loyalty had never wavered. Each bore news of Darren cultists arrested by northern patrols, men who had coated arrowheads with sap to induce a state of fevered delirium they boasted would bond their souls to Whitefire's power. They test the limits, Myra said, voice low. They call it the rite of the frozen heart. They say once you bleed Whitefire, you can never truly die. Ace pressed her palms to the table, steadying herself. They pervert Sam's gift. We must act swiftly, before more petals fall into their hands. Turnan stroked his beard. I suggest we cultivate decoy lilies, blessed only with inert sap, to bait their zealots. Then we trap them at the old ice caves, where once the first blooms were found. Gerd nodded. I will ride with 100 veteran returned. We'll lure them into the caverns under the pretense of a sanctuary, then seal the entrances. Then Sixander. Ace inhaled, recalling the glittering corridors of steam and ice where her grandfather had first discovered hope. Very well. But when we strike, we must show mercy to those misguided souls. Restore them if we can, but punish the leaders who would twist life into tyranny. Within 3 days, under the hush of northern mists, Alice and Gerd led a contingent of lamplit lanterns into the Frostfangs. They followed a herd of Darren worshippers, cloaked figures chanting in a tongue half-forgotten. Down a winding fissure glowing with steam. At the cavern's throat, Alice set down a chest of inert lilies whose petals held only the faintest gleam of promise. The cultists, enthralled, knelt to gather them. At her signal, Gerd's Returned emerged from shadow. Steel-drawn voices raised in the creed of life. The cultists froze, terror and awe mingling in their eyes. Some dropped the lilies, others thrust half-emptied sachets at Alice, pleading, "Give us real Whitefire." But before any violence erupted, Alice stepped forward, voice clear and commanding against the drip of melting ice. "Whitefire is neither toy nor weapon," she said. "It is the breath of life rekindled. You who embrace death for power know nothing of hope." She tossed the inert petals onto the cavern floor. They wilted instantly. Then, in silent rows, her Returned flashed their blades in a sign of solidarity, and the cultists bowed their heads. That night, back at Castle Black, Alice presided over a tribunal in the Great Hall. House Darren's self-proclaimed high priest, a gaunt man named Onless, knelt before her. His followers, many of them starving peasants deceived by promises, stood behind him. Faces hollow, but eyes bright with residual fever. "You drew life only to seek its control," Alice pronounced. "Yet you understood nothing of sacrifice." She turned to her keeper's staff. "Restore these people with Whitefire. Sap. Let them live as they were meant to. Unless, you will spend a year in the nursery's cold quarters, tending the lilies until you understand their purpose. Or, until they claim you." "No." A chorus of relief rose from the captive crowd. Onless bowed his head, tears streaking pale cheeks. He was taken at once to Gilly's infirmary, where Whitefire poultices soothed the fevered and apprentices taught the rites of cultivation. In time, he emerged, gaunt but humble, the first convert of the order who had nearly betrayed its creed. In the weeks that followed, the Darren cult collapsed, its survivors integrated into the community they had once loathed. The episode served as proof that Whitefire, like fire itself, burned indiscriminately for good or ill, guided only by the hands that wielded it. By midsummer, Alice returned to her routines, tending the lilies, instructing novices in the old tongue names of each strain, writing treatises on the ethics of magical botany. Yet she remained vigilant, for she knew that the peace earned by one confrontation could be tested by another. At night, she climbed to the parapet of the shadow tower, gazing southward, where the rolling hills of the north met the distant spires of more populous realms. She thought of Samwell Tarley, a man who dared to believe in a cure for death. His legacy endured not only in blossoms of whitefire, but in the conviction of those, like her, who would guard that possibility against the darkness of ambition. And so, with hope tempered by wisdom, Alice Hornery upheld the delicate balance between life reborn and the perils of power, ensuring that the whitefire lily remained, above all, a promise of spring. A winter's dusk closed in around the wall, and Alice stood on the battlements watching the pale sun slip beneath the horizon. The fields of whitefire lilies at her feet glowed faintly in the falling snow, each petal a whisper of promise against the gathering dark. She had thought the daring threat buried, but whispers now drifted on the wind. Rumors of a faction in Old Town piecing together fragments of Samwell Tarley's journals, bent on recreating the cure in their own towers. They spoke of distant scholars claiming that, with enough whitefire, one could forge a living army of returned under a single master. Such power, untempered by Sam's compassion and Amon's wisdom, threatened to undo everything that the Order had fought to protect. Inside the Shadow Tower's great hall, Alice convened the keepers once more. The torches flickered on tapestries depicting the long night and its end. Scenes of whites melting under whitefire's glow. Sam's blade coated in sap. Gilly's newborn crying hope into the sky. Before them sat Archmaester Laris, now reappointed to a tenuous role as liaison with the Citadel, his face drawn beneath the hood of his robes. Myra Ashfoot leaned forward, hand on the hilt of her dagger, and Gerd the Returned sat with his arms crossed, eyes narrowed in thought. "Reports from Maester Merrin in Old Town are troubling," Alice said. "He writes that several of our gleanings, methodologies of sap distillation, notes on lily hybrids, have been copied without consent. Worse, he suggests that at the Hightower, they debate using whitefire to bind dead soldiers to the Citadel's will." Laris disclaimed gently, "I cannot deny that some maesters believe magic is best studied through control. But the Citadel's leadership remains cautious. They have not sanctioned such experiments. I will petition Archmaester Marwyn to reaffirm Sam's original charter, to protect the Order's autonomy." Gerd shook his head. "Words alone won't suffice. We need leverage. Proof that abusing whitefire destroys the cure itself." Myra tapped her quill against the table. "I propose we offer the Citadel a demonstration. A lily grafted in Old Town soil, with sap tested side by side against our northern strain. If theirs fails, it will show that whitefire's power is rooted only where fire meets ice, in the frost fangs, and that attempts to replicate it elsewhere are folly." Alice nodded. "We will prepare the demonstration, but we must also guard our archives. Myra, secure the northern scrolls in the vault beneath the nursery. Laris, send a delegation, gently but firmly, to Old Town with an invitation, a conclave of scholars at the wall, to witness the lily in its homeland." "Then?" Laris bowed. "At once." A fortnight later, a small ship creaked into the bay at Eastwatch by the Sea, bearing 3 maesters from Old Town, led by Maester Merrin himself. They stood on the pebbled shore, cloaks drawn against the sea spray, eyes wide at the sight of whitefire lilies flourishing in wind-swept rows. Ace greeted them in the courtyard, her posture formal, but the warmth in her eyes genuine. "Welcome," she said, gesturing toward the nursery. "You will find our demonstration awaits." Inside the glass-roofed chambers warmed by hot springs, 2 gardens lay side by side. On the left, the northern strain, tall, luminous, petals glowing like frozen stars. On the right, seedlings begun from seeds sent south, pale, muted, failing to open their buds. Maester Merrin raised a brow, his ornate chain of alloys catching the torchlight. "Remarkable," he murmured. "The climate difference, no doubt." Eddie smiled. "The soil here is enriched by subterranean heat and glacial minerals. Whitefire's magic is born of that union. It cannot be harvested elsewhere." Bender Sauer. Larry stepped forward, holding 2 vials of sap. "We have distilled each. We invite you to test them on equal specimens." He placed a fresh lily blossom into 2 jars of broth, one mixed with northern sap, one with the southern. Within moments, the northern mixture glowed with life, its waters steaming. The southern remained dull, inert. The maesters exchanged uncertain glances. Even Marin hesitated before nodding. I see the truth in your words. This white fire is unlike any botanical magic recorded in Old Town. Its roots are bound to these lands. Now, Ace dipped a finger into the glowing broth. It is our charge to guard it, not to export it recklessly. I ask your help in protecting the Order's autonomy, so that Samwell Tarley's legacy remains a blessing, not a weapon. Marin bowed his head. I will carry your plea to the Citadel, and I will recommend that no further sap be transported south except under strict supervision. As the delegation departed, their ship's prow cutting through dawn's mist, Alice stood on the quay and watched them go. She felt relief tempered by vigilance, a reminder that the world beyond the wall would always covet the Whitefire Lily's power. It was a burden she and her keepers would carry as long as the flowers bloomed. Autumn came early to the Frostfangs that year, and with it a great chill. Ace made her way alone to the community gardens near the wall space, where returned children tended rows of frost-capped ferns and burn thistle. They greeted her with shy smiles, offering harvests of bluebell pollen and heartroot bark. She bent to inspect their work, bundles of herbs destined for new poultices, each ground leaf a testament to life's perseverance. One child, a wildling girl named Shyla, tugged at Ali's gown. Mistress Alice, look. She pointed to a withered lily whose petals lay blackened at the stem. These ones, they died before bloom. Ace knelt and traced a finger over the petals. They were brittle, scorched. Alarm prickled her spine. Who last tended this bed? Shyla's eyes flicked toward a figure at the edge of the garden, a robed man Alice did not recognize. His cloak bore no sigil, and his staff was crowned with a dull crystal. He watched them softly, as though waiting for permission to speak. Ace rose, brushing cold earth from her skirts. Hello? She called. I don't believe we've met. The man stepped forward, voice as smooth as polished stone. I am Maester Varen, recently arrived from the Citadel. I requested assignment here to study the Whitefire Lily's unique ecology. Alice's gaze narrowed. The Citadel already sent emissaries. Why stay behind yourself? Varen inclined his head. Old Town's resources were stretched. I volunteered my service. My methods are experimental, but I believe I can help increase yields. Bendwand. Ace thought of the burned petals at her feet. I inspect every bed at dawn. I would have noticed damage. Show me where you work. He gestured to a row of newer lilies, their leaves pale. Ace knelt beside one, gently pulling aside soil. Beneath, a network of roots twisted and glowed faintly with sap.I. But at the tip of each stem lay scorch marks, evidence of deliberate exposure to unnatural heat. The lilies had been tested with fire, too intense, too sudden, killing them before they could open. Ace stood, fury surging. You experimented on them without oversight. These lilies are not your subjects. Varen's lips curved. You're short-sighted. You guard these plants like children. Yet the world demands more. Under true cultivation, Whitefire could flourish even in the sun. Elisart thundered. That is not our choice. Sam's vision was of healing, not grafting a new empire. You have no right to impose your theories here. He shrugged, eyes cold. The Citadel has the right. I will return with orders to propagate Whitefire across the Reach. Regions beyond these frozen wastes must benefit. Bendawo. Ace clenched her fists. Then, I will not allow it. She turned to Shyla. Take these children to safety. To Varen, she said, I command you to depart the wall at once. If you refuse, I will have you confined until the maesters in Old Town decide your fate. Varen's expression darkened. You have no authority here. Only your order does. And the Citadel outranks it. Ace met his challenge. But our order is chartered by the Crown. I will carry this grievance to Queen Sansa herself. And if you harm another lily, I will consider it an act of war. Then shall. Varen hesitated, then inclined his head. Very well. For now. He backed away, pulling his hood low. Ace watched him disappear into the dusk. A swirl of dust and resentment behind him. That night, she gathered the keepers once more in the hidden chamber. Myra lit candles around the table. Gerd sharpened his sword, and Larys looked drawn, as though parting from Varen pained him. Ailys laid out the burnt petals before them. Maester Varen sought to warble the lily's nature to suit his ambition. He must be brought to task. Then, Myra's eyes glittered. We could arrest him, bring him before the Citadel's own tribunal. Larry shook his head. He has friends among the Archmaesters. A public scandal could fracture relations, leading to more reckless attempts. Gerd spoke last. Then we strike at his support. We root out any who conspire to export sap. We reinforce our wards. Aelys nodded. We will fortify the nursery. We will guard every plot. And we will send a raven to Queen Sansa. Seeking her intervention to remove any unauthorized maesters from the wall. She paused, voice quiet but resolute. This lily is our legacy. We will defend it, not for power, but for life itself. Above them, the wind rattled the tower walls. A reminder that even in sanctuary, vigilance must never fade. And so the keepers of Whitefire set their watch anew, guardians of a fragile flame born of ice and hope, ready to shield the world from those who would see its power twisted for dominion, rather than the promise of spring. Oh. Hey, ka. 1G. Eddies awoke before dawn, the frozen air crisp at the window pane, and dressed in silence. In the courtyard, lanterns cast long shadows among the Whitefire lilies, their glow dimmed now by the approaching winter. She paused at the nursery door, listening. A soft murmur of footsteps, the low hiss of steam from the hidden vents. Myra Ashfoot emerged first, clad in a woolen cloak, eyes bright. Behind her trailed Gerd, the returned cloak dusted with frost, and Archmaester Larys, pale-faced but resolute. We move swiftly, Alice whispered, leading them through the glass corridors where rows of lilies stood like sentinels. Larys carried a satchel of papers, the original charter, and Samwell's audited journals, together with the Queen's signed writ declaring the order autonomous. At the far end of the nursery, where the stone walls gave way to the great fissure beyond, they paused. Myra nodded, and Gerd slipped inside the narrow passage, extinguishing his lantern. Ailys and Larys followed, the blackness swallowing them, the sound of their breathing echoing against ice. Emerging into a vast cavern, they found themselves in the original hot spring grotto, where Sam had first discovered the lilies. Steam coiled in ghostly spirals, illuminating patches of phosphorescent moss. Here, they would meet the small council from Old Town. Merrin's deputation, under the terms negotiated by Larys. If the Citadel's representatives could see the lilies in their birthplace, and the soul of the Order's mission, they would withdraw Varen's warrant and sign a pledge of non-interference. A torch's flare revealed three familiar figures. Maester Merrin, thin and gaunt, with eyes rimmed by sleepless nights. Archmaester Marwyn, his flowing beard tied back with a simple ribbon. And Maester Tala, a scholar of herbology whose fingers still bore stains of balsam. They stood close to a cluster of wild lilies, petals unfurled in a gentle glow. Mistress Alice, Merrin greeted, voice hushed. We thank you for this meeting. Ailys inclined her head. We gather to reaffirm the covenant that Whitefire exists not for dominion, but for mercy. She gestured at the petals. These blooms owe their power to this forgotten spring, to the fragility of life in Frost's embrace. I ask you to witness, and then to swear, no sap shall be removed from these caverns, save what is approved by the keepers of Whitefire, and no order beyond this wall shall bind the returned as forced soldiers. Marwyn's gaze drifted over the glowing petals. He stepped forward, finger resting on a single stem. Such beauty. I admit, I have never beheld true Whitefire outside the texts. Its luminescence. He drew a breath, then continued. It stirs something deeper than alchemy. Tala knelt to gather a single blossom in her ink-dappled hand, turning it as though reading its lines. The veins here correspond to ley lines mapped beneath Old Town. She murmured, but the soil's heat signature is unmatched. This is a nexus. Gerd shifted, hand on hilt. Then may your words match your wonder. What will you pledge? Silence fell, broken only by the hiss of bubbling water. Marin uncoiled the writ that Laris had delivered. In the pale torchlight, the crown seal glinted. He hesitated, then placed his hand on the document. By my station in the Citadel, and by faith in Sansa Stark's decree, I vow. No Whitefire's sap shall be cultivated beyond these caverns without the express consent of the keepers. No return shall be bound by enchantment or order other than their own free will. Marwyn and Tala spoke in turn, their voices solemn. Elise watched their faces, grim, earnest, knowing that in their oath lay the safety of a realm. When the pledge was done, Myra and Gerd signaled the release of lanterns, and the cavern glowed from end to end. Marin's lips quirked in a faint smile. We will carry this witness before the conclave at Old Town. Let no maester claim ignorance. Laris exhaled, relief washing over his gaunt features. Then the Citadel's hand is removed. Alis nodded, bending to pluck a single Whitefire lily. With care, she dropped it into Laris' awaiting satchel. Take this bloom as proof, and with it, the understanding that life's power, once unbound, cannot be constrained. Back in the great hall of the Shadow Tower, Alice convened a full gathering of the Night's Watch and representatives of the northern houses. Winter's breath rattled the windows, but inside, the hearthfire burned warm. Torches cast dancing shadows across the flags of Deepwood and Bear Island and Winterfell. Elise stood at the dais, flanked by Gerd and Myra. In her hand, she held the Whitefire lily, the one witness that would change every doubt into respect. She addressed the assembly, brothers and sisters of the Watch, lords and ladies of the North. Today we secure not only the autonomy of our order, but the affirmation of a kingdom's trust. This lily is our testament. That hope can blossom in the coldest places when courage tends the seed. Menachandi. A rumble of applause rose. The frostbitten scars on Gerd's cheek seemed almost to soften as he joined in the ovation. Eddard Snow stepped forward. His gaze swept the crowd. Eddys Hornery, keeper of Whitefire, you have brought honor to the Night's Watch and to us all. The North stands with you. Lady Lyanna Mormont pounded her fist against her shield. Long live the Order of the Lily, she cried, her voice defiant and clear. Over the weeks that followed, under the protection of royal writ and citadel backing, the Order of the Lily settled into a new era. Archmaester Tala remained as liaison, but Varen's name was struck from the rolls. The nursery grew, drawn scholars learned, and the hidden caverns became a site of pilgrimage, not for power seekers, but for those who sought healing, widows of skirmishes beyond the wall, families of cold-born children, even wandering wildling clans seeking refuge. Ace resumed her daily tasks, walking among the lilies, tending to their needs, teaching novices the old prayers Sam had written in his hand. May your warmth light the dark, may your bloom renew the soul. She found satisfaction in the small kindnesses, guiding a grateful mother through the process of brewing sap for her feverish child, showing a returned veteran how to graft his own hybrid to strengthen the northern stalks, listening to Maester Tala's fresh theories on integrating Whitefire with Heartroot for poultices that soothed burns. Yet as winter deepened and the wall's wind howled like a restless spirit, Elise never let her guard drop. She and Myra updated the ward maps, moved scrolls to deeper vaults, and devised secret signs by which true keepers might recognize one another. They trained a small cadre of returned scouts to patrol the caverns, rigging traps and sending swift word of any trespass. Even Gerd, now captain of the guard, oversaw drills in which every man learned to identify Whitefire's glow, to detect counterfeit strains, to protect the precious sap pea. On the eve of the new year, under a sky ablaze with northern lights, Ellie stood once more on the parapet. The wind snapped around her, carrying whispers of snow. In one hand, she held Sam's battered journal, In the other, her granddaughter's hand, a child with her mother's dark hair and her grandfather's curious eyes. "Grandmother," the girl said softly, "will the lilies always shine?" Eddie smiled, feeling the steadiness of the wall beneath her feet. "They will, as long as someone stands guard. As long as someone believes that life's flame can outlast any winter." Then, below, the fields of lilies pulsed in lunar glow, each a promise kept. And high above, the wall stood silent and eternal, a monument to sacrifice and to hope. In that still moment, Alice knew that Samwell Tarley's legacy, born of fear and forged in courage, would endure, carried by each hand that tended the flowers and each heart that dared to hold the spark of spring, even in the deepest dark.